Welcome to ThinkOut, the monthly debate series of the Institute of Science and Technology for Humanity at Nanyang Technological University, Singapore. At the Institute of Science and Technology for Humanity, we address societal challenges through transdisciplinary team research, combining the latest in science and engineering with deep domain knowledge from social sciences, humanities, business, and the arts. In each ThinkOut, we bring together leading researchers and industry experts from very different disciplinary backgrounds to discuss and debate an important question the world is facing. In a ThinkOut, we aim to dive deep into a complex issue, have fun, and engage you, the audience, to this open discussion between leading thinkers. So this week, we're considering robots that are becoming a common feature in many aspects of our lives, from medical assistants to serving tables in restaurants, and robotic technology has made some of our activities seamless and less labor-intensive. In this ThinkOut, we seek to highlight the role of robots in society and how popular culture, especially the movies, have influenced the way we think and feel and perceive robots, as well as the technology behind it. And we try to engage with you, the audience. Please engage with us in the Q&A. Put your questions there, your thoughts, your comments, respond to the answers as well. My name is Vanessa, and together with my colleague, Andrew Prahl, we will moderate this debate. So over to you, Andrew, to introduce our experts for today.
Great. Thank you very much, Vanessa, and thank you, everyone, for being here. So before I introduce our experts for today, there's something very important that we all must do, and that is we have a poll question to begin the day with. And this is something that you'll see again. You'll see it again at the end. So don't worry, we'll be tracking change on this poll question. So here we go. Popular culture and movies impact our perception of robots. It is agree or disagree, and this is open for all of you in order to answer. And feel free to contemplate that if you need to while I introduce our speakers for today. So first of all, Dr. Wong. So Dr. Wong's research focuses mainly on the interface design and human-robot interaction, which led to the development of the EDGAR series of humanoid robots that most of you know from being the robotic co-host at the 2017 National Day Parade here in Singapore. He is a former senior research fellow at NTU until June of 2021. And now you can find him serving as the CEO and the founder of Maju Robotics, a startup which is spun off from his work here at NTU and set up in January 2019. Dr. Wong continues to deploy humanoid robots while at the same time also developing new robotic solutions, such as disinfection robots for the use in public spaces, as well as robotic grippers and for applications and things such as logistics. In July of 2021, he co-founded QuickBot Technologies and became its chief engineering officer. QuickBot combines the cutting-edge delivery processes with mobile robotics to leverage on smart city facilities for job transformation, cost reduction, as well as sustainability in final mile deliveries. So that is Dr. Wong, who has an extensive CV both here at NTU and in the private sector. So we can't wait to hear his perspective on this issue. And now I'll just move on to doing Dr. Kevin Chu. Prof. Kevin, I assume that's what your students call you, Kevin, because they all call me Prof. Andy. So I'll just go with Prof. Kevin. All right. Prof. Kevin is currently an assistant professor in film studies here at the Wee Kim Lee School. He's one of my colleagues because I'm also at Wee Kim Lee. His research interests span film and media theory, cultural studies, and the history of science and technology. Hold on, I lost my place here. His debut article here is on Disney's Zootopia, and it examines the use of animal allegory and discourses of primal war. It argues that such a discourse ultimately demands the extinction of minority populations, a fate which is ironically exemplified in the animal bodies that supply the figures of the film. His second article on Disney's Moana, which treats the animation of the ocean as a demonstration of an ecological pattern of thought. Kevin's current projects include a book based on his PhD thesis examining political conflict in contemporary Disney animation, as well as a research paper on ecological and military visions in the films of Hayao Miyazaki. Okay, so Kevin, I mean, this is so great because you have such a strong background, obviously, in understanding the symbolism and some of the kind of the subtext in film. So it's just a perfect, I think, pairing that we have here in order to discuss this issue of robots in movies. And the poll question, wow, Well, that's
A
the
first.
most unanimous agreement I think that we've ever had on a NIST ThinkOut poll. So let's see what happens as our presenters have their chance to say something. So first, let's hear. I introduced Dr. Wong first. I think that makes sense. Would you like to give us your perspective on this issue, Dr. Wong?
Right. Thanks, Andrew and Vanessa, for having me here. And what a lovely way to spend a Wednesday afternoon talking about movies and robots, right? So two things that I would say have really helped to shape my life. So I like to begin my sharing with an episode from my childhood. I remember as maybe about a 10 or 11-year-old watching Star Wars for the first time, and it left me just gobsmacked. And I think Star Wars has that effect on many people, right? So I had just finished watching A New Hope, and at the end of the movie, I was just stunned in the living room of my parents' house, and before I knew it, I started pacing around the room and in the dining room, and then that led to a frantic raid on my mother's kitchen. I started pulling out drawers to find things to recreate what I've seen on the screen, right? So I was trying to make the Death Star out of plastic bottles, chopsticks, and aluminum foil and all that. So I just created this monstrosity, and it was a huge mess. But I was very proud of this mess that I created, and along the way, as I grew up, right, I remember this surge of excitement that I felt when I watched Star Wars that had all this fancy technology and robots in it, yeah, and I started to try to build things from the movies that I've seen, right, from perhaps from RoboCop or Short Circuit and some similar movies, yeah. And I got better at building things, and then I started to to pursue an engineering degree. I did robotics in college, and well, here I am, right? And yeah, so it has been a kind of an excitement that has never left me, and I've been trying to recapture this thrill that I felt since since that day when I was about 10 or 11, yeah. And it has been a tremendous ride so far. I had so much fun. However, I will say that building robots is very difficult, right? So it has led to a lot of very frustrating sleepless nights, and right, sometimes maybe even a few disagreements, heated discussions here and there about the best way to build the robot and all that. So it sometimes it can be quite challenging, right? And I suppose my point is that it is well, it is very difficult to build a robot. It has become very much easier since I was a child, right? So people can now buy kits, small little shoebox size kits for children, for grade school children or primary school children, right? And they can bring it home and spend an afternoon building a robot with their parents and come up with something that resembles some sort of automation, right? And I have one here, kind of for the university level. So this is obviously much more advanced, but these are kits, and you can bring home and you can work on them. Yeah. So this is because this has made the process of building, the lower the difficulty of building robots, yeah, very significantly. This is because there are now the technology has become democratized, and computers are now cheaper, right? Things are smaller with miniaturization, and battery technology has become so much better and cheaper as well, right? So now, this has caused educational robots to be very prevalent, and it has also resulted in many professionals, engineering professionals, building robots like the ones that Vanessa alluded to earlier, like those in the restaurants, right? And also in the swanky buildings, cleaning the floors and all that, yeah. So we're starting to see this proliferation of robots within our living spaces. Yet, those robots are still a very far cry from what we see on the screen. Yeah, like robots like C3PO, right? So where are those robots? It's been like maybe 30, 40 years since we've seen those robots on screen, and where are they? They are not quite here yet. The closest real world robot, I would say, when compared to C3PO, would be the Atlas robot from Boston Dynamics. So that robot can run and jump and can do somersaults, but it can't process speech, right? So it is Atlas is a cutting edge robot, but it can't process speech. It can't understand what we are saying to it. It also cannot respond intelligently, right? So, and it also can't manipulate small objects like utensils or stationery. So I would say that humanity as a species hasn't gotten to the stage where robots can act entirely like humans. So I'm a little bit disappointed with that personally. Yeah. So I don't want to end on kind of a bummed out note. Yeah, I would say that I am very glad for robots and robots in movies, and they have helped to inspire a whole lot of people, including myself, very much. And I say keep them coming. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Junia. Thanks. So we'll move on to Dr. Chu.
Thanks. Yeah, I was kind of hoping Dr. Wong would close with a surprise announcement that the C3PO prototype was done, but I'll move on to my part of the talk, where I'll be offering a few comments on the depiction of robots on the big screen, with of course, a whole host of necessary omissions given the expansiveness of the subject and the limitations of time. Essentially, I hope to present a couple of examples that you'll find both salient and productive for today's discussion, and at least provide some food for thought in the enormity of our topic. To begin with two brief histories, a fairly well-entrenched canonical history of the movies places their starting point in 1895, when the brothers Auguste and Louis Lumière held the first commercial screening of a series of short films. The century that followed involved the expansion and rationalization of movie production into commercial studios, with the American film industry achieving a particularly high degree of economic efficiency through successive iterations of the filmmaking systems and institutions that we now bundle into the term Hollywood. In parallel, 25 years after the dawn of cinema, the play Rossum's Universal Robots by Karel Čapek introduced the name and concept of the robot to its audience. Mechanized work processes were, of course, not new by this point, but the notion that a machine could become part of a humanoid labor force articulated a dark societal fantasy. And the play ended with a robot revolution and the extinguishing of humankind. In some ways, it can seem a bit of a skip and a hop from the mechanization of work to Marxism for machines. But this notion of the robot as a machine that might spontaneously develop a humanistic form of sentience, a faculty of critical judgment, and perhaps a demand for dignity, is clearly an intriguing one in popular culture, as a century of subsequent filmmaking might suggest. And perhaps this needn't surprise us, given that the term robot was derived from the Czech term rabota, meaning indentured labor. For the cultural fantasist, in contradistinction to the scientific researcher, the appeal of robotics might be found in the cultural bad conscience that is reminded of humankind's history of slave ownership. This is obviously potentially unhelpful to researchers in the actual field of robotics. And on that note, an interesting thing happens if you type robot patent into Wikipedia's search engine. I'll leave that to you, and I'll just state that I didn't even write that article myself. Robots as a kind of subjugated cultural other that might rebel or revolt are a popular dark fantasy. as evidenced in films like Blade Runner and Ex Machina, or in television shows like Battlestar Galactica and Westworld. The conceit of these films is that robots could develop the spontaneity and creativity of a human subject and place a moral demand for some kind of emancipation from their subordinate status. The concern here is that robots are the expression of a human demand to subjugate other beings, and that the artificiality of robots is a kind of a moral bypass that would allow humans to unleash their darker, abusive drives and desires. In other words, robots as slaves are a dark fantasy that implies human society wishes on some level to regress towards slave ownership or a free range for the darker sides of the human psyche. Another iteration of the emergence of sentience in the movies can be found in films like 2001: A Space Odyssey, Terminator, and I, Robot. These are robots that develop a sense of creativity in their compliance with primary directives, such as how to protect humans. Again, these robots become, in narrative terms, a screen onto which human anxieties about the human condition can be projected. The essential conceit here is that if artificial intelligence were programmed with something so abstract or vague as a directive to protect humans, they would then identify an established list of complaints suggesting that human autonomy is one of the more significant threats to human existence. On the other hand, Pixar's WALL-E and Disney's Baymax are part of a millennial trend in movie robotics, fulfilling the other end of the cultural political spectrum. They're particularly obliging assistants to humans who are otherwise hindered by physical infirmity or emotional immaturity. In a way, they function as a kind of cybernetic or prosthetic extension to human society, filling in physical or traumatic sites of absence, inability, or lack. In this respect, they might be a more proximate commentary to the need for robots in our world as a helper rather than as a bearer of metaphysical meaning and angst for humankind. WALL-E develops emotional attachments that make his film a sort of unashamed celebration of emotional life for humankind in the distant future, while Baymax, as a robotic nurse, suggests that the rigidity of artificial programming might position robots as a suitable counterpoint to the destructive sides of human irrationality. I hope the rest of the session will provide an opportunity to explore such figures further, but for now I'll relinquish the mic, or the spirit torch, given that there isn't really a mic.
Thanks. Thank you, Dr. Chu. Thank you, Dr. Wong, for kicking us off like that. So now we will start handing over to the audience to ask for their comments, their thoughts, their concerns, their ideas. And in the meantime, I'm really interested because I have a social robotics, human-robot interaction background. Andrew has a background in looking at attitudes of people towards AI and robotics. So, we are very interested in this topic. And I guess what you might also notice is that very often robots are kind of seen for a whole host of solutions to huge problems. Climate change, well, maybe we can have robots do this or that. Labor shortage, well, we'll have robots. Oh, not enough people in healthcare. Oh, we can have robots. So robots, I guess, and AI, the embodied version of AI with a body, is often seen as a kind of a catch-all solution possibility, almost maybe as if other solutions are a little less likely. And I was really wondering from both of your perspective, because Choon Yue, I think very often maybe people come to you and say, I need a robot for X, and then you try to figure out what the problem is behind it, and is the robot really the best solution? And Kevin, you might understand why we seem to hang so much expectation on the field of robotics. Maybe to start with you, Choon Yue.
Right. Yes. Thank you, Vanessa. It happens very much. People come to us, not just myself, right? To just roboticists in general, we perhaps we need something to interact with the elderly in a home, for example, or we need to move this particular box from point A to B. Yeah, so it happens very often, and I think that has a lot to do with what's happening in the media. So we read news about robots being implemented in this place or that very often nowadays, and of course there are also the movies also play a part, right? Because the movies and as not just the movies, but perhaps even shows like The Big Bang Theory, or even dramas like CSI make it appear so easy to make a robot. So you can have a robot, you can get it running, test it, and it can fail within the span of 30 minutes plus commercials, right? So sometimes the demands that are requested, or rather the requests put upon us, are quite unreasonable. Of course, they are reasonable ones, right? So it is something that the roboticists have to grapple with, and to kind of explore whether the solution really needs a robot. Sometimes it's just a change in the process, and sometimes the proposed automation is just unfeasible. Yeah, so roboticists sometimes have to kind of be less robotic and kind of have to manage people's feelings about and also their expectations about robots. Vanessa, you're on mute.
Classic mistake. You know, you'd think that after 2 years of Zoom, I would know better by now. But yeah, I wanted to say, Kevin, do you could you give us a little bit more insight what that comes from? That maybe we tend to reach towards robots as a solution rather than looking a little bit more broadly.
Yeah, so perhaps on the basic level, robots in the movies often function as this symbol of futurity and futurism. Essentially this emblem of future possibilities. And given that the substance of movies, especially fiction filmmaking, is to do with extravagance and visuality, then it does tap into this desire for a sleek solution. So yes, I suppose the movies are not necessarily invested in expectations management with in relation to the real world. Yeah, I mean, common complaint about the old Disney movies. So on the one hand, we have this idea of robotics as a silver bullet for any shortcomings going into the future. And on the other hand, as Trina was saying, you have the media influence and the hyper visibility of any deployment of robotics. So perhaps there's a kind of a confirmation bias there. So then perhaps it's just an incongruity between the movies as something that's influential, but not particularly invested in the outcomes of said influence, because it's an economy of attention. And when that's combined with a general penchant for dissatisfaction with everyday life, and the general visual extravagance of movie robots, then I suppose that could become an unfortunate equation.
Yeah, I've heard people from Pixar and this robotist. I'm blanking on the name, but this robotics guy that I know, he had the assignment to build kind of the WALL-E. So what they wanted was to have the WALL-E robot for all sorts of marketing purposes for the movie. And it's really difficult to take a movie character and then build it in a real robot. And he said that the worst thing that they ever asked of him was a robotic Barbie, because Barbie has like a tiny footprint. And it's as a roboticist, you need all the weight to be on a nice solid base so the robot can move around. But of course, a Barbie, it's unthinkable. Tiny footprints, little legs walking. It's a roboticist nightmare. So I think you make a really great point about these expectations that we have from robots. So we easily think, well, a robot can do that, but making a robot is super complex, and it's not just robotics. There's a lot of, you need to really understand vision, like really understand, for instance, Baymax, that movie. There, the robot understands when people are in pain, or when they are hurting, or when they are sad and need a hug. And that's really difficult to do with computer vision and interpreting social signals of people. So the science is also a little bit behind, or very much behind, on what we can realize as our expectations from the movies grow. So Andy, I thought maybe I'll hand over to you to a question, and then we can move on to the audience questions.
Yeah, thank you, Vanessa, and thank you so much, Dr. Wong and Prof. Kevin. This has been great so far, and I kind of wanted to. I heard this kind of in both your talks, because you know, Dr. Wong, you started off by saying, listen, you know, building a robot is really, really difficult, right? And so you need to have a kind of a realistic view of these things, of course, if you're a builder. And one thing that I was thinking about with movies, especially as you, Prof. Kevin, were going through your presentation, I realized that some of these movies are really are quite old. You know, 2001: Space Odyssey. I mean, I'm thinking that, like, you know, this is a long time ago. And when I think about the portrayal of robots in these movies, I realize, you know, that these are things that are smarter, faster, even they surpass humanity in some, you know, in some capacity. And then I think that, like, well, what are the more recent portrayals of robots? And it's kind of the same thing. It's like, you know, these things have surpassed humanity. And so kind of the ceiling of what robots are capable of, at least in the movie industry, really hasn't changed it to me that much in, you know, 40 or 50 years. You know, it's always been, well, these things will eventually surpass humanity one day. And at least in terms of the portrayal of the capabilities of robots, you know, that it sort of has remained somewhat static. And I wonder, actually, so the first part of this question is for Prof. Wong. I know that, you know, being a builder, you know, it means you have a realistic view of things. But do you think that amongst the community of professionals who build robots like you, is this sort of dream, the Hollywood dream of having these robots that surpass humanity and can do all these different things, is that dream alive? Is that the way, you know, is there this little voice inside you that's what, you know, motivates you to build every single day? Or is that just disconnected? Is the Hollywood vision not the proper sort of mentality to have as a builder? And then moving on, I just wanted to ask then Prof. Kevin, like, what is it about Hollywood? Why is it that movies always kind of jump to this extreme? You know, like I say, like 30 or 40 years ago, they jumped to this extreme of what robots were capable of. Why does the industry do that? Is it reflecting society? Is it reflecting the dreams of what they think the builders want from robots, et cetera? So anyway, so first of all, Dr. Wong, what do you think about the mentality of Hollywood versus the mentality of a builder?
Right. Well, thanks, Andrew. Yeah, I get asked this question quite a fair bit, right? But it's always very interesting to talk to people about this, right? Because I think people have very strong views on this matter, especially people like, for example, some of the more famous people would be Elon Musk and Stephen Hawking, yeah, right? So the two of them, they kind of collectively express their concern at the possibility of kind of a robot takeover as seen in the movies, right? So I'm not going to say that this is an impossibility, and I think that robots in general may one day malfunction as a group. Now, I'm not going to say that they are necessarily going to surpass humans, but then as with any technology that is able to create a significant impact on the human race, we really do worry about the possibility of it malfunctioning in a manner that can hurt humanity as a species, right? So we can say that also about technology that's related to war. We can say that about nuclear technology, right? So with nuclear technology, there are two sides of the coin, right? So we've been grappling with such dangers for a long time, and now people are starting to think of this kind of danger from the perspective of robots and robotic technology. So I would say that definitely definitely be prepared as robots become more prevalent. Be prepared to take measures to ensure that what we see in the movies do not happen. Robots taking over doesn't happen. I won't say also that it's going to happen very quickly, but it certainly is a possibility. And possibly one of the ways that we could do that is simply to design the system such that we can have a kill switch, but perhaps in the future robots may prevent us from activating the kill switch. Then we have to think of some clever methods such as denying the robots from having energy, right? Then perhaps they'll fade away after a while, right? So maybe do not make battery technology so good. So curtail the growth of battery technology, for example. I don't know. So I'm just kind of spitballing here. Yeah, but it is something interesting to think about, and something we should be prepared for.
Responsible by design.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah. So so Prof. Kevin, about this extreme, vision that Hollywood always jumps to, what do you think this is about?
On one hand, Hollywood styles itself as a dream factory. Narrative worlds in Hollywood are glamorous lives without the grubby edges. I mean, how many Hollywood narratives would fail if people actually needed a bathroom break in a key scene, that kind of thing? It's really a very stylized way of presenting the world. So in that sense, the glamorous portrayal of robots and this extreme vision of robotic capability fits into that, just as it were, the Hollywood style then of thinking of our dreams in rather extreme terms, robots making life effortless, or robots bringing about the apocalypse. That kind of pendulum swing between two extremes. We can see that in Big Hero 6, where on the one hand you have Baymax as this robotic nurse with an implausible set of capabilities, and midway through the movie he's converted into a fighting machine. And that's a tension that the film flags up but never really fully resolves. And I do like that ambivalence, intended or otherwise, in the film. It sort of has to pay homage to its status as an adaptation of a Marvel comic series, but it also captures that tension in how technology is applied. Dr. Wong mentioned radiation. I think there was a 6-week interval between Wilhelm Röntgen's discovery of radioactivity and the use of X-ray imagery in a Canadian hospital. The 5th week atomic bomb. So there's this, I suppose I could just carry on calling it a pendulum swing between these quasi-utopian applications of technology and nightmare visions where technology can produce power through destructive potential.
I want to respond as an engineer. It's really comforting to hear, because then it's not the technology itself that's inherent good or bad, but it's the way that people use it, right? Baymax is first being applied in a hospital setting as a nurse or in a healthcare setting, and then the same tool is kind of applied in a warfare setting. So it's not the technology itself that say I've made and therefore I was wrong, but it's people abusing it. It's a misuse of some useful tool that we've developed for the betterment of people, but it gets abused, and that's a real challenge, I think, in engineering, in any engineering environment.
Yes, and I'm inclined to agree that it's a matter of political praxis rather than an issue with technology, or in this case, robotics. There have been some interesting debates about whether a technology can be, as it were, radically evil from the root because it enables certain things, or whether it's a question of application and political context. I'm more inclined to think of it in the latter terms, because, as you say, to avoid any technology that might have a destructive potential would rather inhibit any kind of technological possibilities.
Yeah, stand in the way. So I think this brings us naturally to a question by Zhang Xiao Sun, and it's talking about real human-like robot, where with the hardware and the software. And I was hoping we could take this a little bit further, because what is up with that drive worldwide to create a robot that is just like a human? I mean, I of course go to all the robotics conferences, and every year, you know, they present their new super humanoid robot as if that's the, you know, the end goal of robotics, to create a robot that's indistinguishable from a human. Whereas sometimes, you know, a human is not the right solution. If you want to open a can, probably an octopus arm is much better than a human hand. So I wonder, yeah, can you say anything, Choon Yue, about what is that obsession with recreating a human-like robot? Whereas I think arguably the human shape and form and functionality is not the best solution in many cases. Yeah, what needs to be prioritized to realize it, if we want to realize it?
Right. Yeah. Actually, to be honest, sometimes because I helped to design the Edgar robot that you see behind, that people will expect me to say that, yeah, all robots should be shaped like humans. And I only did it because it was my job to do to do it, right? So, but having said that, I mean, when you make a robot in the shape of a human, people immediately can identify kind of some expectations that you can have pertaining to the robot. For example, the robot is expected to interact with you, to speak with you, to recognize you, for example, and just in general to conduct some kind of interaction with you as you and I are doing right now, right? Except through Zoom, but then face to face with the robots. Now, having said that, you know, I think that it is not necessary to have robots shaped like the humans, shaped, you know, in an anthropomorphic form, because as you've mentioned, this form is not always the best. For example, if I were to want to have a robot squeeze into a pipe, for example, right? So we are really bad at squeezing into pipes. So an octopus-shaped robot would perhaps be better at exploring the pipe and going downstream to check for, I don't know, corrosion or something like that. Yeah. So, however, if you're building a social robot, it really is a lot easier if you kind of start off from building, making the robot in the shape of a human. Still, it is not entirely necessary to have the robot look like a human when designing an interactive robot. So I think one very good example of a robot-like entity is the Pixar lamp, right? The Pixar lamp is expressive, right? It doesn't look like a human at all. It is able to express its kind of its activity, its level of energy, perhaps a little, you know, its emotions a little bit through its actions and through the intensity of the light bulb, right? And a classic robot, another classic robot would be R2-D2. R2-D2 doesn't look like a human at all, but it is able to express its emotions through beeps and tones, right? And its actions. So if you're assuming that a social robot needs to look very much like a human, then perhaps you need to watch Star Wars.
Yeah, that's a good point. So, Dr. Chu, can you reflect on this, what I call obsession in creating the most humanoid robot? I may be a little biased, but yeah, every conference, what you see is super humanoid robots or robots that can hand over a beer. I mean, it is so boring. See the new solutions.
So is it then to do with the social competence aspect, or is it to do with the technical sort of virtuoso of a humanoid robot? Because I was just
Yeah,
returning to Star Wars, like you have R2D2. I actually got the miniature BB-8 toy. I don't have it in my office because I was worried my students would never listen to me again. But you know, like the idea of a quasi-emotional football is very charismatic in a way that C3PO perhaps was not necessarily. And looking at Interstellar, where they have these intensely functional robots, which are, you know, these modular rectangular blocks that have just an incredible number of hinges, there is both a practicality. Perhaps they cheese a bit on the social competence side because the voice acting is perhaps again a bit implausible for but that is an interesting side whether the anthropomorphism could be or displaced onto a robot voice rather than a robot figure. That said, how personable these robots are considered by audiences would be an interesting and separate question. I like them, but
yeah, and in the movies, sometimes I guess robots seem to replace people, like Tetsuan Atom, Astro Boy. It's yeah, a new sun, and there's other movies where yeah, where they have a robot replacing a child often.
Oh, yeah, Steven Spielberg, AI.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I suppose that's a concern around. Well, that was a concern in the play Rossum's Universal Robots, and also later on in Battlestar Galactica, now and then Westworld. Perhaps it is then to do with how there's this strangely persistent or compelling, for whatever reason, notion that the height of well, technical competence again would be in creating an artificial person. The Blade Runner question about whether you could make something indistinguishable from a human as a just really a virtuoso flourish as a roboticist.
Yeah, as an engineering goal, it's interesting. It's like, you know, going to the moon really spurred a lot of technological innovation. And here you could say, okay, if we can make a robot indistinguishable from a human, it'll allow us to do a lot of breakthroughs. But I don't know, I don't know how that is from your perspective from the movies. You mentioned before that sense of loss, coping with a sense of loss. Would that explain it a little bit? Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's the thing with Baymax, in that he's not completely humanoid, sort of an ambulatory marshmallow, I think is how they described him. And the sense of loss, then he plays the video of Hero's brother. So yeah, he's not exactly there as an ersatz human or as a replacement for a human as such, but kind of a point of access, a medium in several senses. You know, his somewhere between a video log, a crypt, and a memorial. So there are very clear limitations to his resemblance to a human. On the other hand, he's able to channel a human influence between, well, from beyond the grave, as it were. And that's what I was referring to, the sense of loss and a bit like Wall-E. There's something melancholic about Baymax in that he is reminding living people of the aspirations of people who are no longer around. So this isn't really a futuristic robot in that sense, but also a nostalgic one.
Interesting. Yeah, that's really
and
interesting.
I wonder then if the film is then posing a different question of whether it's to do with you're not getting carried away with technological progress, and because with Big Hero 6, it's about not applying technology towards violent ends.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah,
I feel like we could go on forever. Over to you, Andy.
yeah, absolutely. Well, actually, the last thing you said there, Kevin, about the application of technology to what end. We have a really interesting question here from Marcus Teo, who's asking actually about video games, in the sense that video games can sometimes parallel or present different narratives than we may see in the film industry. And I'm sure, I'm guessing, Dr. Wong, it's like the classic cocktail conversation situation. You're talking about your work and somebody says, oh, well, have you seen this movie? Like it's kind of like that movie or something. I'm sure that's happened to you, but I almost wonder, do you also get the comment now, oh, well, have you played this video game? Or you hear about people saying like, well, in this video game, I have like a robotic assistant or something, a sidekick or something that follows me around. Then that's actually quite an interesting question, because if you think in a video game or something where you're able to actually interact with something online, it's different than watching something on a screen in which the narrative is selected for you. So to speak. So anyway, so Marcus's question kind of touches on this. He says, do we expect video games to play the same role as movies in pushing for the inclusivity of robots in our everyday lives? And there are some classic video games. He references Detroit Become Human, and it has salient themes on the humanizing of robot helpers, which is really neat. So generally, do you both sense a difference between video games and sort of the big screen movies in terms of today's talk, the subject of our talk today? So first, Dr. Wong, I'll give you a chance.
I think that's an interesting way to look at video games. Honestly, I haven't played video games in a long time. I wish I had more time to do so, but I would say that video games do not have as big a reach, as the silver screen as with TV, right? So it's going to the robots there are not going to inspire as many people. However, I have seen some very nice screenshots from up and coming games and all that, and I say that those can be quite exciting and inspiring. So I think that video games can have some effect on inspiring people to build robotic helpers to follow them around. But the big push is going to come from the movies and from TV in general.
Understand. And thank you. And then over Prof. Kevin, how do you feel? I'm sure you get this all the time in academia, right? What's the difference between game studies and cinema or something like this? So it's probably a classic question for you. Yeah.
Yeah, it is, and it's all right. So firstly, I didn't play Detroit. I watched Detroit because I'm one of those people who watch other people playing games on YouTube, because video games are expensive, and I suppose I just spend my money on movies because that's more professionally relevant. So anyway, I think the boundaries are disintegrating somewhat, and we do in film studies talk about, for example, the first-person shooter perspective in the movies, and there is a definite interaction between movie and cinematic aesthetics. Call of Duty franchises, a very clear example of a mutual influence. So yes, I think the movies still have a broader audience than video games. Perhaps there's somewhat less of a time investment, and have a different level, perhaps, of social standing, for better or for worse. I don't think it's I think playing video games is no longer seen as like the social evil that it was 20 years ago, but there's still some catching up to do, and perhaps it's more to do with the time investment. You can get through a movie still in a couple of hours, or a Netflix episode in less than an hour, unless it's Stranger Things, but that's another matter. So I think they will operate as parallel influences, but with regard to the reach, I think that's dependent on the market, and that's perhaps a different question to whether they exert an influence on their audiences.
Yeah, really interesting. I wonder about this video games thing, because I'm kind of like you, Kevin, in that I don't have time to play these things anymore. But I do think like ages ago, when I used to, I'm talking about when I was in high school, these were very basic video games.
Are you guys just saying that?
Yeah,
Are you just saying that? And
I'm
actually,
serious.
you spent the whole day playing video games.
No, really.
Yeah, actually, sorry, you got me.
Yeah. No, but really, there's these games. I'm sure there was something that I played, but oftentimes you're actually interacting with the characters, which is different than watching it on the screen. So I'm sure there was some difference in my, the way that affected me in terms of robots.
Doom.
So
I remember playing Doom 100 years ago, and then going home scared, watching behind every corner, thinking someone would jump at me. But the experience is different, right? A movie, you all have the same experience, but a video game, you don't. You have a very different story. Yeah, absolutely. So there's one really interesting question here from one of our attendees, and I think that this attendee has actually spotted something here, in that we've been framing most of the discussion about humans versus robots, and they've kind of said, well, what about the idea of augmenting humans with robots? What about combining the two? And I mean, I can immediately think of a number of movies that have been about these like cybernet with these augmented humans, right? So I'm actually curious, what about this? What I mean, first to Dr. Wong again, is this something? I mean, you're obviously heavily involved in the industry. Is this something that you sense that there's a large push for, that we actually want the augmentation of humans rather than something separate? That we want to merge the capabilities of human and machine. And then to Prof. Kevin, you had such great insights, in discussing, what is it that having these robots that do certain things, what does that say about our human desires? What does that reflect in our culture, in our kind of our inner selves? So then if we kind of pivot to thinking about these hybrid, human machine systems that we've seen in movies, I'm curious as to what you think some of those narratives are. So anyway, again, first to Dr. Wong, how do you feel about this?
Well, I think it's definitely something that we should be doing, right? Robots are excellent tools for physical rehabilitation, as well as for augmentation, right? So we know that robots are typically used to as a solution to cater to the labor crunch, right? So physical therapists are few and very expensive, and the physical therapy session is very time consuming, right? So there has been a very concerted effort with research that's being conducted around the world to help with rehabilitating maybe spinal cord injuries, with upper limb and lower limb injuries. There is also research that is done to do rehabilitation for PTSD as well, right? So people create social robots to have therapy sessions with soldiers who are perhaps returning from a war zone, right? And they kind of want to train people to interact normally again, right? And also there are robots that are used as a way to treat what is that, the autism spectrum disorder, right, with children to help them to learn skills such as turn taking, skills such as sharing, right? So these are various ways of using robotic technology for in the healthcare industry to rehabilitate and to augment people. So I'm hoping to see more robots in this area to not just be used in the medical industry, but also perhaps to be used in other tasks, such as in construction, for example. Right. So this would be something quite exciting to look forward to.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, we are kind of nearing the end, but maybe Kevin, you have a very quick reflection on this merging of humans and robotics to finish us up.
Yeah, so that kind of cybernetic augmentation is, on one hand, novel in terms of actually attaching something to a person. On the other hand, the notion of augmentation is already a long way underway in that I couldn't fulfill a normal set of functions without a wristwatch, or with my millennial attention span without writing everything down in this discussion. So in that sense, there's already so much that we do with recourse to external tools that are becoming, as it were, more internalized by the decade. Using technology then as something that can augment or compensate for whatever difficulties we might have for whatever reason doesn't seem much more radical than wearing spectacles. In that sense, it doesn't raise perhaps new philosophical questions. It's just the visual, the novelty is more incremental than radical.
Yeah.
Understood. I feel like we could really have a much longer discussion on this and take our time to really reflect on this. It's really this hour is not long enough. There's another wonderful question by Zhang Xiaosun around emotions, human-like emotions in robots, which I feel can be a whole new think out around social computing. But we are definitely nearing the end, so I will wrap this up. And the closing poll shows that actually a few people have been swayed that some our perception may not always come from popular culture and the movie. That's interesting. Definitely, there's been some deep thinking happening during this Think Out, and it brings us to the end of our Think Out debate. And our sincere thanks go to Wong Choon Yue, well known for founding the NTU spin-off company Maju Robotics that develops robots to meet the fast evolving labor needs of the post-pandemic era, and to Kevin Chu, whose film studies examine how, for instance, how political conflict is reflected and articulated in contemporary animations. So as a token of our appreciation, the famous Think Out water bottle is coming your way, but we also thank you so much for being part of our podcast series. Audience, thank you so much for your participation. And please follow us on our social media platforms, of course, the Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter for as long as they may exist. And to learn more about this debate series and access research papers and information on both of today's speakers who have kind of fascinating contributions that you can learn more about from our website. Please join us for our next Think Out. It will be in the new year, and we will discuss the social and technological support that is developed to deal with dementia. And we look forward to you all joining our future Think Out sessions. Thank you so much, Kevin. Thank you so much, Choon Yue, for discussing this fascinating topic with us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.